That's all I know. I know nothing.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to take a more in-depth look at what we started with last time. Well, I think we finished with last time. And that's how Yaakov and Moshe Rabbeinu responded to a challenge. Right? What would we expect them to do? That they would toughen up with confidence in Hashem, trust in Hashem. That's what we would think. But in practice, they both ran away. And so the Zohar's answer was that there are people, which we said is like times in a person's life, or certain areas in which you don't understand, where your response should be one not of strengthening yourself in bitachon, in confidence, self-confidence, confidence in Hashem, but rather in faith. Okay?
Strengthen in faith, not in confidence.
And what's the big difference, like we said? That in those things that I understand something about, that I understand that this is part of my mission in life, in those things it's up to me to lead the way. And to lead the way means to either do something myself that will result in the end I would like to see, like the solution to the problem that I would like to see. I have to do something myself. I have to proactively engage the problem. Or if I can't do it myself for whatever reason, because I don't have the tools, I don't have the abilities, but I do understand what the final result should be, so to think good and it will be good.
That's it?
Those are the two options. Those are called active confidence and passive confidence.
Think good is active?
No, it's the passive, because I can only think.
That's
I
the
can't
faith.
do more than that. That's not faith, because I know something about this topic. So I have an idea of what needs to happen. And those things that I have an idea about what needs to happen, what God needs me for is to picture that end, to picture that solution, to picture how it comes about, even though I might not have the means to make it happen.
You know, that's not easy.
Right.
To picture
Right?
happy,
Even-
peace, people getting along. What is it
Oh,
look like?
that's just imagination.
No.
What we're talking about here is much more than that. We're talking about that I have a vision for how this will happen, not just what the final result is. Because the final result, you can also envision, when you say everybody getting along, that could just be a picture of God. That's just godliness. But what does it mean that people get along? What's the process involved? What does it take for people to become peaceful? And what are those things? That's something that only if you understand people and you understand how they work and you understand how systems work and so on, you might have a picture of. And then you can think good and it will be good, because all you're being demanded of is to think good, because obviously you can't do anything at the moment. Where are you stuck? On the obviously you can't do anything at the moment?
Because you said if you don't have the tools, this is more than just not having tools. I mean, there's something in between. Either you do it yourself, and you're saying don't just think, don't
I
just
could be a
imagine
carpenter
it.
and I know exactly how to build a cabinet, but I don't have the tools.
But you're talking.
I can't
you went
do it
on
right
to say
now.
more
Or
than without just not having tools, you've got to. How do you fix? You can't just imagine how you will fix the system. You have to fix the system.
what if I can't? But I understand how this needs to play out.
And then what?
That's all I'm being asked for.
That's not. That can't be the only two
That's
choices.
life.
That's why it's
That's
not happening.
part of life. Part of life is what I envision in my mind, not just what I do, because my mind is a vessel for my soul. It's one of the garments of the soul. So when I think of something, it has value just as much as when I say something or when I do something. They're all garments of the soul. They're all an embodiment of the infinite. The infinite is my particular soul.
So, but how do you translate that? I mean,
You
how
don't
do
need to translate it.
how do
You
you
already
get it?
did. By thinking it, you've already translated it into, you've articulated it into letters, into words, into thoughts. And that means that you have a capacity to understand this topic. If you don't understand this topic, you won't be able to articulate it. All you'll be left with is a residual image of something that you don't understand. Like,
Does mean nothing.
right.
So, are you going to tell us how to do that next thing?
No, I'm saying like the perfect example is if you're a carpenter and you know how to build this, you just don't have the tools right now, or God forbid, you don't have hands for whatever reason.
Okay,
you can't
know
do it
how
anymore.
to, maybe.
You know what needs to happen. So obviously, if you're a carpenter, it sounds very technical because it's all just putting stuff together.
Well, everything's technical. I mean, to make a good world is pretty technical. It's
Right, except it's very complex.
Yes, exactly.
So you might not.
How
so I
do
don't know
you
how many
turn all
people.
that
I don't know
complexity?
how many people know how to make a good world.
That's
I
what
doubt
we-
there's more than one or two in the world at the moment.
What do you mean it's
So
not?
that's obviously not under my jurisdiction.
No, we have to.
What
do
is under
more
my
than
jurisdiction?
just-
Hold on. What is under my jurisdiction, for instance, or my responsibility, is how do I ensure that my son who's in yeshiva gets all the attention that he needs? And he knows that I'm giving a class right now, but he calls anyway. So how do I give him the attention that he needs? He needs attention. He needs something from me. I can't give it to him right now. So I picture right now what will be in, let's say, an hour and a half. So that's all I can do right now because I'm in the middle of class. I can't, my hands are tied. I can't talk to him. So that's all that needs to happen. That is my contribution right now. I now have passive confidence that my thinking of him being able to solve his problem, whatever it is right now, is enough for him to be able to solve his problem because I can't do more than that. That's all I have right now. But it's not that I don't understand what his needs are. I understand them. I also understand how to solve them.
So you're saying that the thoughts that we have
The thoughts themselves
go
act.
into the world
Right.
and do something.
Because they're the embodiment of my soul at this moment. There's nothing else I can do. If I have something else I can do, I should do something more.
They have some kind of an effect,
Of course.
less than action.
That's why.
more than-
That's a big deal. That thought is one of the garments of the soul.
And thoughts versus prayer. Thoughts is
Why
not.
versus prayer? Prayer
Well-
is speech. It's much more than that.
But you're talking right now about thoughts.
And it can be prayer
It
and it
can
can be
be
action.
prayer.
And they're equal.
Equal?
They're equal. They're all garments of the soul. No,
Action.
they're not
No,
passive.
no,
No,
no.
no, that's active.
If sometimes all I can do is something passive also. To do something passive would be like to hold back something. Not to do something constructive, but just to hold back from doing something else.
From doing
No, no.
something destructive.
Okay. I could hold back a destructive force. That would be a passive act.
Passive.
So do you follow these words? Maybe these words passive and active are giving you a hard time.
No, what's giving me a hard time is there's nothing else I can do besides think and pray.
Sometimes that's all you can do when a person is in jail, God forbid. So all you can do is think. But you see that the things that he thinks about and does during that
Will
time
lead to his future.
lead to
Okay,
incredible
okay.
repercussions afterwards. I mean, you've got this guy
Look at-
Yuli Edelstein, who's now
Mhm.
the whatever of the Knesset, and he was another one of these prisoners of Zion in Russia. And he can right and Yuli Edelstein he got it in just in the last 3 years that you couldn't be a prisoner of Zion after he was pretty much the last one. So for 3 years, and he's one of the most respected. Not that I would want to be in that group, but he's one of the most respected members of Knesset. So that's something that happened because of his. I don't know if only because, but his
Yeah,
thoughts
he
certainly
did.
contributed to it. They made an impression in the world. Even though he was passive, he couldn't do anything, but he resisted. He resisted breaking. And that's passive action. He resisted the forces that wanted him to give in. So that has tremendous impact in the long run. But it doesn't matter. Even if we would never see the impact, it doesn't matter because maybe that's why you're here.
Just to resist.
Just to resist, just to hold on.
Doesn't that make you feel kind of useless?
Why? You're doing something nobody else can
Actually,
do.
We learned this. We learned this from, you gave an example in Nach of someone who was
Certainly,
it?
Chizkiyahu, that he goes to sleep.
No, it was different. It was that someone's whole lifetime,
Right, Baruch ben Neriah.
yeah,
It wasn't exactly a resistor, but he never gave up on the possibility that he would become a prophet.
right.
And he never became a prophet. But he spent
But it makes sense
90
to me
years.
now.
He's lived till age
Yeah.
90, 89,
What
I
makes
think.
sense?
Concept.
Because a lot of what we do is not.
It wasn't an unsuccessful life.
Yeah, it was very because of
He
him. We have
wrote
the
a lot,
book of
right? Or
he wrote
Right, it
Jeremiah's
helps
prophets,
if you write your thoughts.
prophecies, right? So you can write them
If
if
you
you
might be
can.
the only one who sees them.
Ah,
Yeah,
no,
it
come
might be
on.
that it's
No,
only
no,
you.
no.
It might be.
Right. Yeah.
But that's the entire idea that if you live in a world where everybody's telling you you got to go viral or something like that. I just read a post, a very interesting post last night by some guy in, I don't know, Singapore or whatever. And he says, what happens after you go viral?
And you're gonna
So he says he wrote a post a year ago. It was archived on his blog on traveling somewhere in the Far East. I don't even know what it was. It was so unimportant. But it was picked up by some guy who has a huge group on Facebook of travel. And he put it on his Facebook, so everybody went to see it. So he says that group alone brought 10,000 people
to do what?
to read his
thing,
blog
his
article.
Oh.
And he says within a week, it burst because of all the people that were there moved it out. I don't know why it was, he says himself, I don't know why it was so important. And by the end of the week, he had 1 million views on this article. So 1 million's quite a bit. It's not like the people who have, 40, 50 million subscribers on YouTube. But that's a lot for somebody who's used to getting maybe 2,000, 3,000 views on his articles. So suddenly something goes viral. And then he says, so how did that change me?
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Should I only be writing about this topic because it went viral? Does it mean anything? Should I be pursuing these people? How do I translate? And he came to the conclusion that it had nothing to do with him. And you don't know. It doesn't, if you're consistently getting millions of views,
Right, like
you don't
said.
have these questions.
Right.
Okay, but if it suddenly happens to you once, it doesn't really mean that much. Okay, this was important. Who knows why? He doesn't know himself. This
Well,
is
what did he do
one
next?
of the most
Did he do it? He
inconsequential
could have
articles
done-
I've ever written.
He should have done something with that.
But there was no way to translate it because that's not his topic. He wrote it in passing, whatever it was,
What was the message?
and who knows?
It's
He
like
didn't
with
even
travel.
write it because it was so unimportant to him.
No, right, exactly. What
But
was
suddenly
the
he
real
sees
message?
that this thing went viral. So there's not much you can get from
What
it.
was the lesson? Somebody had to learn a lesson.
The lesson was that you might go viral for reasons way beyond your control. You did not contribute anything to it. There was a set of circumstances that came together and pushed you into the front, and you're there for a week, and that's it, and you're gone. Who knows if it'll happen again? And it doesn't really matter. Because you hear this from everybody who's doing something worthwhile, is that they do it because they enjoy it, because they think it's important to them, not because it's important to X number of people outside. There are people who are pushed into the forefront and have 50 million subscribers on YouTube, and they've got a real job to do. That's their job. What can they do? Hopefully they also enjoy it. So the fact that I'm put in a situation where the most I can do is think about it, is to pray about it, is to do this and do that, okay, that's what my mission is right now.
If you pray, that's still passive? That's not
Then it's
active?
even more, it's a little bit more active because
Yeah.
I'm saying something. If I can do, it's even more. But even action can be passive. Even prayer can be passive. Even though I'm doing something, like Javi said, it would feel better to write it out. That's right. I think you should have a journal and write these things out.
Feel
Or
more
write
messy.
a book in your head if you can, whatever that means. I don't know what that means, but there are people who write books in their heads.
No, he repeated
Kind
one
of keep
sentence
repeating.
over and
Kind
over, and then
totally.
the second, and then
Maybe, because there's nothing else to do.
yeah.
You're stuck in solitary confinement for a whole year. What are you gonna do?
You can act like Yosef.
What did Yosef do?
But he acted.
I guess he wrote in books also. He wrote books also.
Didn't he help the Sarah, didn't he interpret their dreams?
After 12 years.
That was after many years it was in there. So in any case, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the fact that this is what you can do right now, that's it. That's what you can do. But don't discount it. Don't treat it like it's something that doesn't have value. But all this is passive confidence. That's not faith. Faith is when I have no role to play here. I'm simply not part of the plan.
Who can never have a role?
Of course you can. Things that don't call you, or you have nothing
Not
to
related to me. I don't understand anything in this.
me and math.
I may understand that there's a problem, but I don't understand how to solve it. I have no clue. I may understand there's something can be done, but I can't. I don't know what needs to be done. So all this was to say that Yaakov and Moshe Rabbeinu, when it came to the particular events that and challenges that faced them, they didn't know. They were not a part of the world in that sense. And I don't remember if we said this last week, but there's a famous saying in Chabad that there were 3 people who had a chush, meaning they had a sense about this world. They knew how to conduct themselves in this world. And the first one was Adam Arishon, Adam.
We didn't.
He did.
No, we didn't discuss it.
Oh, we didn't discuss this. Sorry. So Adam Arishon, he was one of the people that knew how this world works. So he was all about, he couldn't be somebody who was just in faith. He had to be in active or passive confidence. And that's why we see that Hashem, he knew so much about how the world works that Hashem didn't make it rain until he prayed for it. Meaning he's an important player in how the world works. The 2 others that are mentioned, were the 2 others. One is the Baal Shem Tov.
Nice.
See if I can remember who the last one is. Maybe I'll remember later on. And then there was one more. And then the ones at Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
That's what?
How interesting.
Yeah, he knew how the world worked.
So he separated himself from it.
So, no, very interesting.
No,
He was the one who was most against, or we've talked about this in the past. He learned the lesson from the Bar Kokhba rebellion better than anybody else. He understood what it meant better than anybody else. He understood that you can't win by coercing the Romans. You had to win by convincing them. He said, war is not the lesson of that rebellion is he was a student of the man who led the rebellion, Rabbi Akiva, the biggest supporter of Bar Kokhba. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he came to the conclusion that what this rebellion meant was that it was the wrong approach. Because you have to understand that back then, everybody knew to some degree that the world depended on what the Romans would do. That's why the relationship with the Roman Empire became, in the eyes of the sages of Chazal at that time, a reenactment of the relationship between Jacob and Esau. They saw it as just a replay of the whole thing. And just as Jacob knew that he needed Esau to join him and to let him take the lead, and if they would join forces, then they would redeem the whole world, so the sages at that time understood that everything depended on what the Romans would do.
But he knew he had to let Esau take the lead, but he didn't. He couldn't.
No, he didn't. No, Esau can't take the lead.
Right.
Jacob has to.
But wait, didn't you say Esau
No, I
knew?
said that
Wait,
Jacob
knew
knew that everything depended on Esau joining him
joining him.
and allowing him, Jacob, to take the lead.
Right. Oh, Esau letting Jacob take the lead. Okay.
But join him first, not fight him.
That's what we're
Right.
saying, yeah.
So when he came and he wanted to fight him, so he understood that it's not starting yet. He's not ready.
He never tried to fight him. Yaakov never tried to
No,
fight
Jacob, Esav. Esav came with 400 men.
Even with anything they went through, it was never, first he
Good.
grabbed the heel, everything he did was, he understood that,
It was.
yeah, it seemed like
Well,
Yaakov was going around.
He was trying to maneuver around him,
Right, no?
but in the end, he gave up. He gave up. So the sages also understood that this was a turning point. This was a possible turning point in history, and so they identified the Roman Empire with Esav,
Mm-hmm.
saying that if we can work together, then the world will become connected to God. It'll be a redemption.
At
This will
what
be the
point did
goal.
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai realize this
Only
wasn't-
after the rebellion.
Uh-huh.
It's not. We don't find any kind of argument between them when Rabbi Akiva was still alive, and we see that Rabbi Akiva from the beginning had the soul of a martyr. It's like all my life I've been
Waiting.
praying for the moment when He takes my life, like that I'll be able to
Right.
say Shema at the moment when my
Right.
life is taken. So you can read it as he was waiting to be able to do the ultimate act of sanctifying God when he
Right.
was on his deathbed.
Right.
But it doesn't sound that way. It sounds like he was waiting for some kind of really traumatic event during which he could proclaim his faith in Hashem.
I guess he understood his own soul.
Okay, I guess that's what he was. So we don't find that during his lifetime Rabbi Shimon ever argued with him about this.
Makes sense.
But after he passed away, then Rabbi Shimon taught. Then he also had to run away, but he ran away from the Romans, and he hid for 13 years because he was associated with his teacher, and he couldn't get away from the association, guilt by association. But when he came out, what he taught and what he preached and everything the direction that he went into was exactly the opposite, which was that through this book that I'm teaching now, the Zohar, these teachings, these mystical teachings, they're what's going to change the world. They are what's going to take us out of exile, and he writes, in mercy, with compassion, and not through conflict.
Hmm.
That's what Shimon Bar
For
Yochai
what?
said.
Yeah.
Why do people think that it wasn't written until the 1300s? Where's that come from?
Because that's when it was revealed.
But there's no substance in that, is there? I'm just sorry, but somebody had a big thing on me yesterday. They came and sort of
Very
attacked me
little.
with. There's no.
So
such
the
thing as
academic
just
world
a-
doesn't know how to deal with something. In the academic world, there's no such thing as a text that was concealed for 1,000 years. No such thing. Doesn't exist. Okay, what can I do?
No, I know that.
So
There's
they're
no
they're
question
entitled
that
to their
Shimon Bar Yochai wrote it.
opinion.
That's what I'm saying.
No,
I'm
of course
asking.
not.
Anybody who reads it, first of all, sees there's been tons written about the language, the parallels,
Right.
and many other things. And again, the academic world has its mindset already, so they find whatever they find. They find what they want to find.
Well,
And if you learn it otherwise, then you see that this is something else.
but
it's not from
Rabbi
the-
Ginsburg and all these people are all academic. What do you mean, Rabbi Stein? I mean,
What do you
we're
mean by
talking about-
academic?
These aren't small people. They believe the Zohar was written and they have proof of it. I'm just saying.
Let's leave it for another
Okay,
discussion.
but there's no question. I'm just because I
No
all
question
of
in
a
my
sudden
mind.
this person is shooting this religious person shooting this stuff at me like. who
Unfortunately,
said it? Who proved it? I
the
never heard
religious
this.
people in today's world know a lot more academic books than they know Torah. And it's highly doubtful that this person has read the Zohar from cover to cover,
Right.
whoever said this.
No, they haven't.
So if you spend your life and you dedicate an hour a day for, 20, 25 years, or like Rav Ginsburg, 6 or 7 hours a day learning the Zohar, so I think you come to a different conclusion, but it doesn't matter. In my opinion, it doesn't matter at all. It's not the point. In any case, that point of view that Rabbi Shimon had is certainly his point of view also in the Talmud. And he's very careful to challenge the Romans, but never to go overboard. And he challenges them. He's not willing to make his life easy. And he says, you're pagans, and you're this, and you're that, and you need to change. You have a long ways to go, and so on. but he never ever goes into a state of hostility towards them. As opposed to Rabbi Akiva, that was his direction. The bottom line was that the Romans were so upset at the Bar Kokhba rebellion that they couldn't hear the name Judea for the next 100 years. They couldn't stand to hear it. So even though by the time Rabbi Shimon's main student, Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who compiled the Mishnah, by his generation, which is about 100 and something years after the destruction of the temple, his best friend in the world is somebody who eventually became a Roman emperor. And he apparently converted to Judaism, and he saw the truth in it. He wasn't able to bring the Romans with him. He couldn't. In fact, there's a whole thing that the whole story with Nero. I think Nero was the one who they say killed himself, or it was a cover-up for the fact that he converted also.
Mm-hmm.
So there were people, very important people in the Roman Empire that did convert, but they had to hide it. And the Roman Empire as a whole was never able to make peace fully with the idea that Judaism was what they were looking for. What ended up happening, not to blame anybody, but what ended up happening is that Christianity took over.
Mm-hmm.
Because Christianity is a watered down version
Mm-hmm.
of Judaism, and it was something that they could swallow. Of course, they didn't like Christians at first. They thought they were just as crazy because they were also Jewish in the beginning. But eventually they made peace with that. That notion was easier for them to accept it. And as far as historians are concerned, monotheism was a necessity for the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was tearing itself apart. And one of the main reasons for the conflicts, or at least what was sustaining the conflicts, was polytheism. Was that each faction in Rome had its own god. And so one of the things they needed desperately to create some civil peace was monotheism, to get rid of all these gods and just to have one god. And okay, there's a lot to be said about that. Why are we talking about that in the first place?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai understood the world.
So we say that he understood the world. That he understood how the world works. And if you want to affect change in something as tremendous as the Roman Empire, you don't do it by fighting them.
Didn't he come out actually and recognize the bridges and?
He said
Romans
they
had built?
did this and that, but,
Right.
but they're doing it for the wrong reasons. It's the reasons that need to change. That we need to change.
Reasons.
No, I'm
wait,
enforcing what you're saying. That
That he understood. He understood the value.
Wait.
He just said it was being done for the wrong reasons. You should have progress. You should have technology and so on, but it has to be done for the right reason.
And the right reason would have been
To make life easier,
no.
not to take taxes.
Just to get the
people.
Notice of Rosh Chodesh out to the whole world.
Okay. Anyway,
That's
we're
right.
not advancing enough here, so we need to skip here. So the point was that Yaakov and Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand how the world works. The only one we know about for sure that they're among the three that didn't have a sense in this world is the Arizal.
Arizal did or didn't?
He didn't.
He didn't either?
He
You
didn't.
said Yaakov
That's-
and Moshe didn't know how.
And I'm adding to that it's pretty certain from the Medrash and from the Zohar that we read that Yaakov and Moshe also don't have a sense, a feeling about how this world works.
Is it connected because they didn't enjoy anything from this world?
Well, that also. But the main thing is that Yaakov, we talked about this last time, I think that Moshe is considered Yaakov's soul. There's a lot to be said about that, what that means, but that's how the Zohar describes it. They're almost like a soul in a body. They're almost the same person. Otherwise, it also doesn't make too much sense. When I lived with Lavan, and Rashi has to push in there suddenly that it means that I kept 613 commandments. There were no 613 commandments in Yaakov's time, so where does he know it from? So he knows it from himself, from his soul, from Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave the 613 commandments. Okay, let's put this aside a second. Where we're going with all of this is we want to see this medrash And we want to see this time not how it's interpreted in Chabad, but how it was interpreted by somebody who was affected by Chabad. Not openly. He never said this openly, but you'll see in a moment that... And he gives us a tremendous take on everything we've been learning. So it's a Sfas Emes. That's what I passed out. If you don't have a copy, then you should get one from here.
I think everybody got.
Okay. Let's read it, because we don't have much time. In the Medrash it states, the chosen among the patriarchs and the chosen among the prophets. Who are these two? The chosen among the patriarchs is Jacob, and the chosen among the prophets is Moshe Rabbeinu. The Almighty made a promise to them that He would watch them and be with them, and yet they were fearful. Okay? So what is that? It sounds like
No faith.
confidence has not worked very much for you. Right? The word even in Hebrew is, He made a promise, Hashem made them a promise, Hiftichan, He gave them bitachon. He gave them His word, He gave them His trust, that He would be with them, and yet they feared. So we saw last time that the two times in the Torah that says somebody ran away are by Yaakov and by Moshe Rabbeinu. Here it's talking about that it says twice about each one of them is fearful suddenly. So in last week's Parsha, on Shabbos, 2 days ago, we read that Yaakov was afraid of Esav. How could you be afraid of Esav if Hashem made you a promise that you would be okay? Later we find that Moshe Rabbeinu is afraid of Sichon. Sichon was the king of Cheshbon. He was one of the Amorite kings. And Moshe was afraid of him. And Hashem had to say to him, Al tira oto ki imchani. Don't fear him, for I am with you. So says the Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes is the grandson of the Chidushei Harim, Rav Itchemeyer, who was a student of the Pshischa, of Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, who was a student of two people, the Choyze and of the Yid, the Seer of Lublin and the Holy Yid. The Seer of Lublin was a student of Rebbe Elimelech of Lizhensk, who was a student of the Magid, who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. So we're talking about the Pshischa being the fourth generation of Chassidus. So you could also say maybe the fifth. And the Sfas Emes is already like the seventh generation. Okay? And Sfas Emes lived in the early 1900s, same time as the Rebbe Rashab. Okay. So he states like this, I heard from my teacher, my grandfather, meaning from the Chidushei Harim, a wondrous thought on this. Following his own judgment, Jacob understood that he was in danger. So Jacob, when he looks at his situation and judging the situation with Esav, he says, I'm in trouble. And even though he was confident in God's promise, but the promise did not affect him, and he did what was needed and prayed when in danger. These were his words. This is what my grandfather taught me. So listen, what is he saying? He's saying that even though Yaakov had received a promise, he was fearful and he prayed, and that's to his... Is that something negative or something positive?
He
It's
should pray.
positive
And he prayed.
that he prayed.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he received a promise that everything would be okay, what would you think? Somebody who received a promise that everything would be okay, what should he look like? Completely complacent, confident.
Yeah. that's
Nothing
not good.
can happen to me. So he says he was complacent, he was confident. But that's from the side of the promise. From his point of view now, not what God told him, but from what Jacob sees, what he assesses the situation to be, he's in trouble. So what does he need to do? He needs to pray.
Mm-hmm.
He says these two have to work together in unison at the same time. This is the biggest principle maybe from the Baal Shem Tov.
Is prayed also
That
faith?
you move forward in life when you can hold on to two opposites. If not at the same time, then at least one after the other. So on the one hand, he has a feeling that everything's fine, because God promised me everything would be fine. On the other hand, when he looks at it from his point of view, he's full of fear. So he has to pray. One does not cancel out the other. So this is, if we go back to the Zohar that we learned last week, what he's saying is exactly what the Zohar, how we would interpret the Zohar in Chassidus. That if you're part of the intellectual Abba and Ima, there you should have faith. And if you're part of Zayin, the Shechina, there you should have confidence. You have to have both. You can have both. It's not like just one. There's one type of soul that should only have faith, another type of soul that should only have confidence. Every person is made up of both emotions, both feelings, both courses of action, both approaches to his relationship with God. On the one hand, there's faith. On the other hand, there's confidence. On the one hand, there's faith. There's only God. He does everything. I don't need to do anything at all. On the other hand, there's confidence where it is all up to me. In this case, Yaakov did all he could. What did he do? He prepared for war. He sent out a gift to Esav, and he prayed. So all those things, where did he do them from? From the point of having confidence in himself, from his own assessment of the situation, from his own experience. But at the same time, he was also complacent. Why? Because God had given him the promise that everything would be okay. So he has both at the same time. That's what his grandfather taught him. So now he wants to understand these words. And it seems that from heaven they do not make a promise. This is an incredible statement.
Is it his grandfather talking still?
No, so this is him now.
Okay.
So he says, what I learned from this is that it seems that from heaven you don't get a promise. Who gets a promise? Who gets the promise, Hashem's word, that everything will be all right? Unless it is a person who possesses these, meaning who for this reason is called God's chosen. And if this prayer would have gone missing because of the promise, he would not have been given a promise. It's only for a person who possesses these. We'll say in a moment what these are. But it's a person who can hold both sides of the equation at the same time. Both sides of the paradox. If you can't, if you're told, I'm giving you a promise, everything will be okay. And because of that, you will not experience the world through your own eyes, you're not given that promise from heaven. Meaning, I'll say it now in very modern language, which I don't think he could have said, your absolute trust in God cannot take away from your failings as a human. The theology cannot go against your humanism. They have to go together. Meaning that I know that everything is from Hashem, I know everything is fine. At the same time, I also have to look at things from my human perspective. And the human being prays to God. It's not God praying to God. Mm-hmm. So that's why if you only have theology, if you only have this promise from Hashem, you wouldn't pray. If so, then you're not given a promise, because it can't be that the promise would overbear your natural inclination to reach out to Hashem.
What does the promise look like today? Something you've already
so let's give an example. Simplest example.
Exactly.
So let's say, we brought this example already with Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. It says that when on Shabbos, when he was sitting in front of the Shabbos table and all the food was in front of him, what did he use to pray? Hashem, please give me my daily meal. What do you mean? It's right in front of you. So that's like, I already have the promise. Here it is in front of me. But it doesn't take away from his humanity, which is that everything that I feel hungry. So if I feel hungry, what do I need to do? Pray to Hashem to give me. It doesn't matter. The fact that I have it in front of me means nothing. Because that's theological.
It's a little confusing because it feels that should be more of a thank you than a request.
Right. After you eat, then you say thank you. That's why we say thank you after we eat, not before.
I'm saying when the food's on the okay. But the feeling you have inside.
What?
You're grateful. The feeling you have inside.
After.
Are you going to ask for food when it's in front of you?
That's what he's saying. That the promise doesn't take away from my humanism.
How could we make that more practical? I mean, I could think of it.
Very simply. Let's say that a person. Okay. Obviously. But let's take something even more than that. I have a family and children and so on and so forth. That's a promise already. In the sense that here it is. I pray about it all the time. Because for my humanism is that nothing is guaranteed. And my feeling is one always of, I need to contribute something. So what do I contribute to this whole situation that I'm in? I find myself in. Suddenly I have a family and children. Where did that come from? So the thing I can contribute, my humanity to this situation, is to pray to Hashem, is to connect with Hashem. So it could be a prayer of thanks. It could also be.
So it's
But
always a cooperation of Hashem
these
and
two
man
sides.
and Hashem.
The promise is from above to below, and the prayer is from below to above. And prayer, again, is just an example. It's what I do
Is
with
this
my
where someone-
garment of speech, but I could also do something with my garment of action.
Is this where someone might say you're not given no one's given a challenge they can't overcome? Would someone take this from this?
So explain, why is this connecting?
It's the same thing. It's in front of you. You're given. That's the promise. So we're given good, and we're given what's not seemingly good. So now, if you cannot overcome this, if you cannot pray in this circumstance, even envisioning a good result, a good end result, then you wouldn't be given it. Hashem doesn't want us to fail, right? I don't imagine.
It's very interesting. And the next section is exactly on this.
Uh-huh.
But he says it a little bit differently, so I was
Well, I
to
need
see
to
if
think
you could
about it more to
somehow...
word it.
No, you'll see it's not just the wording. It's a little bit different. But you're in the right direction. That's where he's headed. Okay? So he says, if you can be somebody who can hold on to his humanism, to his humanity, that I need to pray for everything. By definition, what is man? Man is always deficient. By definition, God is always perfect. They don't have to contradict. In fact, though they contradict, they create a paradox, they have to work together. So on the one hand, I have a promise. On the other hand, I have to pray. So he says that's what Jacob was. And a person like that, for whom the promise will not eclipse the experience, can be given a promise. Say it another way. If you take for granted, the moment that you get a promise, it's like taking something for granted. So if I would take for granted the good that I have in my life, I wouldn't need to pray for it.
Right.
I can, at the one hand, at the same time, on the one hand, feel that here it is. I don't have to do anything for it. It's here not because of me, because Hashem gave it to me. It's a promise. On the other hand, to understand from my point of view, I'm deficient. And so this doesn't have to remain. It doesn't have to have been here in the first place. So I am always in a state of prayer. Mm-hmm. So who are the two people? Who's the person who's most like that? That's King David. King David says about himself, I need tefillah.
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
What?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Also, he says it?
Also, what did he do? Didn't he not keep the mitzvahs and he only davened? Or?
Oh, that he only has to say Kriya Shema. And he davens once every 30 days.
Oh, even better.
That's because it's Torato Manuto, because his learning is his occupation.
Oh.
So he's puttered from davening. The one who davens about everything is King David. Everything. Even what he has. He still davens about it. Why? Because he's so in touch with his failings. He's so in touch with his deficiencies. He's Malchus. He is the kingdom itself.
He's got the combination down perfectly. So it seems.
Why?
He's so in touch with his insufficiencies, and he's king.
And he's the king. And that's
People
the
listen
only,
to his word.
that's the only reason that he's king.
Okay.
Because if you wouldn't be because what are we really looking for? For somebody who, in spite of the deficiencies, is above everybody else. And you see both at the same time. You see him that what gives him his stature is his willingness to not run away from his deficiencies.
Should never Jew be like this?
Right? That's what we learned in Parabah B'dat Hashem. We said that's the first lesson of the psyche. Shiftless.
Isn't that
What
a
we
promise
call
also?
lowliness.
The chosen people is not a promise.
Yeah, that's what it means to be chosen. So it says on the one hand you have a promise, on the other hand you're completely in touch with your humanity and with your failings. So that's why Jacob is called chosen in the first place. For this reason it's called God's chosen. As it says, he chose Jacob for himself. And if this prayer would have gone missing Meaning, if he wouldn't have prayed at that time when Esav was coming towards him, the promise would have eclipsed his prayer. He would not have been given a of the words in the Medrash, the continuing of the Medrash, we didn't read it, do not fear is said only to one who has fear. That's what it means. He said, Hashem, the promise is, don't fear. Why shouldn't you fear? Because you already have fear. Meaning he has fear ingrained into him. He will feel the fear anyway. He will feel the awe of the situation anyway. He never loses touch with his life. Let's say it in a different way. That if the whole purpose of coming down into the world is to do something, but you can't. To do something doesn't mean to go back out of the world. It means to be in the world, and in the world there are deficiencies. There is fear. There are difficult situations. So if somebody who's like this, it's not so hard to guess, Buddhists, by severing all attachment to the world, you go into nirvana. It's great. Because what does it mean? That nothing can impinge on my high. But how do you do that? How do you ensure that you stay in that way? No attachments. Can't have a family. Because you know what? People get sick and people are difficult and people get divorced and it's a tough life. So what's the easiest way to stay in nirvana? Don't have any attachments. He says, what does it mean to be chosen? That I fulfill my mission because the soul came down into the world to experience this, because this needs to be rectified. And you know what gets it rectified? That somebody is willing to deal with it. That's what rectifies it. But if you run away from it and you say, I'd rather just lead a peaceful existence without any relationship with reality, so that's not life.
That's why even if we don't see it fulfilled, it can still be called
Right,
success.
right, because you dealt with it, because you saw it, because you experienced it.
Now I get it.
And that's what the human being is. It's the part of Hashem that experiences the deficiency. This is a really important statement. A human being is a part of God that has a connection to what is lacking, to what is deficient, to what is not working. And one of the biggest statements from one of the early Kabbalists, long before the Zohar was
Hashem
revealed.
could never connect
What?
to the deficiency without.
Sorry?
Hashem could not connect to deficiency. If
Did-
not for, the
It's not that Hashem could not connect. This is Hashem connecting to the deficiency.
That's a different spin on what most people say.
What do you mean?
You're talking about the part of God that is in us.
Yes.
So you're
we
saying
are the part of God that experiences the deficiency.
Yeah.
We're not the part of God that's perfect.
clear.
That we should be clear about.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Can you call this the Yechida? Is this
It's the whole. Again, it's at the most
The whole
basic level
expression.
what it means to be a human.
Did you just somewhat say that God is deficient?
Wow, that's it.
That was one of the
You were
most important
saying-
statements that you could say jump-started the whole interest in Kabbalistic thought,
Yeah.
not in the Kabbalistic tradition, but in Kabbalistic thought. It was said by Rabbi Israel of Gerona long before the Zohar was revealed, by the way. He was either he was a teacher or a student of the Ramban, of the Nachmanides, which leads to the very clear conclusion, Ruthie, of what you discussed before, if you're not listening right now, that the Zohar was passed down through Nachmanides' academy. That's where it was before. That was where it was in the 13th century. Before that, it's a little harder to figure out where it is.
Somebody's phone.
This is so confusing.
you listen to it?
So he said a very important statement that jump-started the whole interest in Kabbalistic thought, which was that if you take away deficiency from God, you've taken away from His perfection. God has to include also the deficiencies. The simple explanation is the deficiency is what we see here. This
Here,
is the
where?
part.
Is that where they get the idea of
All of us.
anthropomorphism?
Everything here.
Can't
Is
I-
that
What?
where they started anthropomorphism? God is angry, God is...
No, that's in the time of Chazal.
Their interpretation
The
of
Torah
it,
says that.
that it's so that we can relate to it. No, it's
That's
not
what
the
the
same
sages say. Hashem reveals himself this way, so that it doesn't mean that he's really. He just reveals himself so that we can know. Okay. And the explanation is that certainly all the trials and difficulties that come to the world are necessary. Whatever a person is faced with is required. It has to be part of the world. If it wasn't part of the world wouldn't be whole. For they require some rectification. Why is it in this world? Because it's some kind of deficiency that needs to be fixed. As the sages say in the Talmud, one who includes the name of heaven in his difficulties receives twice the livelihood. What does this mean? Let's look below. The Maharsha explains, this follows the verse, I got him with him in his trouble. Kol tzaratam lo tzar. That Hashem is part of the troubles. Which part of him? The part that's is Shechina. That's his name that's in the troubles. That's what we say in Chassidus always, that you don't pray about yourself, you pray about the tzara of the Shechina, the pain of the divine presence. What does it mean? That if any kind of trouble that you have to pray about, first of all, pray about the fact that why should Hashem experience this? It should be rectified. Meaning that one who prays should pray that God act in order to help his name that is with us in our troubles. And this is the true meaning of including the name of heaven in our prayers. So he says all the troubles in the world are needed. So you can't, if you get a promise and that promise takes you away from these troubles and you can ignore them and they don't mean anything, so you're not playing out your part in reality. You're not being a human being. You're not fulfilling your mission. By the way, it's not all just the pain, even though that's where it's most difficult. It's also the joy. You don't fully understand the joy until you understand the other side of it. You don't understand what redemption is until you've experienced some kind of exile. Again, to say that this is meaningless is terrible because it's all the meaning that there is. Obviously, there's more meaning somewhere above, but in our lives as people, even a small victory over a small problem is meaningful. It's meaningful to the person. Is it meaningful in the grand sum total of history? Are they going to write about it in the history books? No, they're not going to write about it.
Yeah, but everybody does.
But Hashem, who is everything, he certainly knows about it. Not only does he know about it, you're the part of him that's experiencing it. And that's figuring it out. That's what he needs you for. So, if the individual who received a promise is not going to pray for his troubles, so he has no way of bringing God into the world per his mission. And the righteous individual whose heart God finds to be faithful, he reveals all the salvation that will come, and still that individual stands before him in prayer. So on the one hand, he knows the Geula, on the other hand, he completely experiences the Golus. There's this famous story about Rabbi Menachem Mendel Vitebsk. They asked him whether the Mashiach would come, so he had to open the window and smell the air outside. Everybody says, why do you have to open the window? Can you smell the air in your room? He says, no, the air in his room was was already redeemed, was already in the Geula. So he himself, he was living in a state of complete redemption. Rashbi says the same thing in the Zohar. That Rashbi, for him, it was as if the temple had never been destroyed. He was in the Geula himself. But that wasn't something that prevented him from understanding where the world is at. So you could live both sides. And he says that's what we find, likewise we find in regard to Jacob wanting to reveal the redemption. At the end of his life, Jacob wanted to tell them about the redemption from exile in Egypt. Some people say it has to do with the final redemption, but it doesn't matter. First of all, it was about how they would be redeemed and when they would be redeemed and what it would be like and so on. And he could not reveal it to his sons. Why? Because he was the only one who could be in exile in spite of knowing the moment of redemption. Not knowing it just when it would happen, but already experiencing it. He could experience the paradox. On the one hand, everything is redeemed already. On the other hand, I fully understand the difficulty of this world. That's called being, what is this called? This is a concept in Chabad it's from the Baal Shem Tov, called in Welt, ois Welt.
English.
In the world and outside the world at the same time. It says that the biggest achievement that the Baal Shem Tov said that he had spiritually was his ability to be in the world and outside the world at the same time. What does that mean? He says that at the same time I can see from above the world. So when somebody comes to talk to me, I see them how they are in their redeemed state, how everything is fine. On the other hand, I can also listen to them and fully understand their pain and what they're going through. So every one of us, that's what it means to have emunah and bitachon. That's why it's a paradox. The emunah gives me the feeling that it's all good. We've talked about this a lot. And you have to go there once in a while, just there. And the bitachon is understanding the difficulty here and what needs to be done to overcome it. But to know what to do in order to overcome it, you have to fully understand the pain of this existence. The trials, the tribulations, everything goes with it. But you have to hold both at the same time. You have to be able to contain both. You're a paradoxical being. I don't know if anybody remembers here, but once gave a course, 13 weeks, on the 13 main paradoxes in the Baal Shem Tov's thought. Because paradox for him was the way forward.
We had a course?
No way.
Yes. You did.
Susie, things she
You did.
collected all this paradox.
Your year did.
Our
13
year
weeks. Not your year. Their year.
That's not fair.
But it's okay, they don't
Their
remember.
year.
No,
Wait a
she
minute,
was
she
there
and I
second.
are in the same year.
So you were there?
No way.
You don't
I was
remember?
1 year after you
I
guys.
don't
Right.
remember.
I don't either.
There's 13 paradoxes that the Baal Shem Tov discussed. They're all like this. They all work in the same way.
Painful for that person.
What?
Would it not be painful for the Baal Shem Tov? Like to,
But every one of us is
like
like
for
this.
Yaakov, yeah.
Every one of us is like
What was this
But
book you're
there's
talking
they're-
about?
That's what it means to have faith.
Globally.
With
What's the
faith,
name?
everything is fine.
What's the name of the book you were just talking about?
It wasn't a book.
What
it
was
a
it?
course.
A
Course.
paper. What did
It
you
was
take
a
it
shir
from?
that Rav Ginsburg gave
What did you take?
20
Where
years
was it
ago.
taken from?
From a shir that he gave 20 years ago.
Maybe you could Google it. I'm sure you could.
Okay,
Pull up on
I really
YouTube.
have to end.
Yes, you did.
So let's bring this next week and we'll try to finish because there's something
Yeah.
in the next paragraph which is
Oh,
just
no.
amazing.
Will we see it if we read it?
Yeah, you understand.
Why were we
Okay.
talking about the 10 people that understood the
Okay,
world?
because I wanted to say that Yaakov and Moshe Rabbeinu, who were full of
Did
fear,
not understand.
they didn't understand the world. Meaning, what it's trying to
They
say
didn't hold
is that
hands.
they weren't part of the pain of this world. But that's not what he's saying. And he's saying something different.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Okay.
You're right.
So what
It's
if they weren't
contradictory.
part of the
How
pain
can
of the
you
world?
pray for the people,
Right,
Hashem, you know?
right.